Excuse me. Oh, sorry, that was gross. Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome to What a Ghoul Wants. My name is Anna. For those who are new here, this is my channel where we talk about pretty much everything that has to do with horror. And today I have designed a bracket for a March Madness for horror movies. So the real March Madness is coming up, so that kind of inspired today's video. I'm calling it the Scary 16 instead of the Sweet 16. And I went ahead and just did 16 because I felt like 32 was just too many movies and it would maybe be too long of a video. So I went ahead and pared it down to 16. And so that's how I got the Scary 16. What I did was I just found a list of, best horror movies. I went through and picked out ones that I had seen until I got to 16. So the ones on this list are going to be some pretty heavy hitters. And my basis for the winner is going to be which of these movies would I bring on a desert island? If I had the ability to play movies on this desert island and it was the only movie I could bring, which one would it be? So that's going to be how I'm judging my picks for today. So I have included a download of the image of the bracket in the description of this video if you would like to save it to your phone or your computer and fill it out yourself and see which of these movies will reign supreme. So I am going to go ahead and just get started going through, and we're going to do left side of the bracket first, then right side, and then go back and forth until we get down to the bottom two. So if you guys are ready, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so starting out on the left side of the bracket, we have Rosemary's Baby versus the original Halloween. We're already starting out pretty hard. So between these two movies, I've probably seen them about the same amount of times. And I actually feel pretty similarly about each of them. I really enjoy each of them, but they are not my favorite movies by any means. So do I want to go for basically the quintessential original American slasher or one of the best movie adaptations of a book ever? Man, this is a really hard decision. And if I'm going for rewatchability, if I'm going for one that I want to see over and over again, that I won't get tired of, I think I gotta go with Halloween on this one. I think that one has such a high rewatchability, and just having to watch Rosemary go through basically being gaslit by everybody in her life over and over again, I think would be pretty upsetting to have to watch that over and over again. So having, Laurie come out on top in the original Halloween, that's always a good moment. So I am going to go with Halloween on this one. All right, so Halloween is moving into the eerie 8, I guess we could call it, if we're going with, alliteration puns. Okay, now we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, versus Jaws. Again, this one is really hard for me because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my favorite horror movies, and I just love it so much, but Jaws is such an amazing and timeless classic of a horror movie, and they're both so good in their own right. Both really encapsulate the 70s in a lot of ways, and I can rewatch both of them quite a bit. So, man, this is really hard too. I feel like the ones I have paired up right off the bat are really hard decisions, and I should say that the way that I laid out the bracket was I just randomized all of the movies that I picked, and it's completely random which ones were paired up. So yeah, they just happen to have some pretty good ones against each other. Here's the thing. Can I deal with Franklin's incessant screaming from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for that being the only movie that I'll be able to watch over and over again? Jaws is really fun. I just feel like I can't have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in my top 4 horror movies and not have it go on to at least the top 8. So I think I'm going to go with Texas Chainsaw Massacre on this one. But this was a really hard decision for sure. All right, so we are moving on up. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is going to be going against Halloween. Oh, that's going to be hard, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet because we still have the rest of this side to get through. All right, so we are moving on to The Thing versus The Shining. Again, this is another really hard one. I love them both. I love them both pretty equally. I mean, both quintessential 80s horror for sure. The Shining is so atmospheric, and there's so many memorable scenes from that one, and just the performances are amazing, and there's just so many different things to latch onto with every watch, so it really is good for rewatchability. But I mean, The Thing is one of the best stories in horror. I mean, gosh, it's so high up there with metaphor and meaning, and who can deny Kurt Russell as McGreedy just is amazing, and Keith David's amazing. I never get tired of the special effects in this one either. It's more of the same, I guess. The Shining has a lot of variety in set pieces and things like that, whereas The Thing is, they're in that bunker the whole time, and it's snowy, and it's great, but if I'm going for more variety, I'm leaning towards The Shining. Gosh, this is so hard. Why did I do this to myself? I guess if I'm going with my gut, I'm gonna say The Shining. I'm sorry, The Thing, you're so good, but I think The Shining ekes out just a little bit ahead of you. So we are moving The Shining into the Eerie 8. All right. Next, we've got David Cronenberg's The Fly versus Psycho, of course the original. These are two where I have seen Psycho more than The Fly, and I do like them both a lot. I would say if we're comparing leads in this one, I mean, who can beat Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates? But then again, I do love Jeff Goldblum a lot, and both their performances are really great. Would I be willing to watch the body horror of The Fly over and over again? Maybe. The concept is super interesting, but Psycho is such a classic. It is a bit slower paced if you're comparing the two, but I think if we're going with pure entertainment value, I want to say The Fly. Don't get me wrong, Psycho, undeniably a classic, but I think if this were a desert island situation, I would be going for The Fly. So we are going to move The Fly into the top 8. Okay, so this is all of the left-hand side, so we are halfway done with the 16, and I'm going to move on over, instead of going through these 4, I'm going to move on over to the right-hand side and start over here. So up at the top, we have the original Carrie versus Alien. Okay. 2 70s movies pitted against each other with this one, and I do like them both. There is one that I like more than the other, and I think is just a better overall film, and I think that's going to be Alien. I mean, Carrie is great. I love Carrie, but I think if we're going with special effects and the performances, I mean, Sigourney Weaver obviously is amazing as Ellen Ripley. I do love Sissy Spacek as Carrie. She just completely embodies the role of Carrie so well. But if I'm picking between the two characters, I think I'm going Ellen Ripley, and just overall the idea of the xenomorphs and all of that. Carrie is interesting. The whole telekinesis is very interesting, and it's a much more intimate character portrayal than Alien, but I think if we're going head to head, for me personally, Alien is going to win out against Carrie every time. So we are going to have Alien move on to the Eerie 8. Okay, next we have The Exorcist versus Suspiria. Both famous 70s movies, and both ones that I do like a lot. If we're going purely on aesthetics, Suspiria would win. I mean, just such a gorgeous movie, so beautiful. If we're going off of substance, then Exorcist would win. Both really cool supernatural stories. If we're comparing leads, Linda Blair as Reagan just absolutely kills it, does an amazing job with that role. And of course, Jessica Harper as Susie in Suspiria, again, great. Much more to do with her body language and expressions, and a little less about the character compared to Reagan, which obviously we see such a change in her throughout the film, from being this innocent girl to being possessed by the devil. So this is going to be a hard one because they both have really good strengths, but if we're going off of rewatchability, I'm gonna have to go with substance over style on this one and go with The Exorcist. So I'm very sorry, Suspiria, but I gotta go with The Exorcist on this one. All right, and it is moving up into the top 8. Okay, next we have A Nightmare on Elm Street versus the original Night of the Living Dead. So this one is a little bit easier for me because one of these movies is also in my top 4 favorite horror movies of all time, and that is A Nightmare on Elm Street. No hate at all to Night of the Living Dead. I absolutely love that film as well. But if we're comparing stories, I mean, just the whole idea of Freddy Krueger and the dream sequences and all of that are so compelling and so cool. The effects in Night of the Living Dead are great too. I absolutely love the zombie design in that, but I think overall, if we're going off of just the impressiveness of the effects and how they're integrated into the story and just the idea of Freddy Krueger, I mean, he is one of the most iconic horror villains of all time for a reason. He's so scary in the first one, and I love Nancy Thompson as a final girl so much. She's one of my favorite final girls ever. And I do absolutely love Ben from Night of the Living Dead as well. I mean, he is such a great character, so strong, and of course the ending of that is tragic, but I guess so is A Nightmare on Elm Street if you go with the whole Freddy coming back at the end scenario. But as far as rewatchability, I basically never get tired of A Nightmare on Elm Street, so it's gotta win out on this one. Sorry, George A. Romero, I love you, but Wes is winning with this one. Okay, and the last set of two on this side are two 90s movies. It's weird how a lot of these are matching up with the decades, but two of the most iconic horror movies of the 90s, I would say, and that is The Silence of the Lambs versus Scream. Oh, this one is really hard for me. I love them both. We've got the incredible Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs with the foil of Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal, and those two have such a good dynamic. It's so compelling. I could watch it, like, if they just added like 10 more scenes of them talking, I would not be bored by that. And then, of course, we've got Neve Campbell as our Sidney Prescott in Scream, and she is another one of my favorite final girls. If those two are going head to head, they are really strong competitors, Clarice and Sidney. They're both so well written, and again, I do love Wes Craven as a filmmaker. Scream is one of those movies that is undeniably a huge part of the genre. It changed horror in the 90s, but Silence of the Lambs really kicked off the decade with, you know, an Oscar-winning horror movie. Oh gosh, this one's so hard. I will say I probably have seen Silence of the Lambs more than Scream, but that's not to say I don't love Scream just as much as Silence of the Lambs. And Ghostface is just such a cool villain, and our cast of kids in Scream is so likable. I love Gale Weathers. I mean, so much about it. It's just such a fun ride. But I think I'm going to have to go with Silence of the Lambs. I think for that, it's just got such a great 3-act structure. It flows so well. It's so well paced. And we've got not one, but two villains in that. I know Scream technically has two villains as well, but just having on one hand Hannibal Lecter and on the other Buffalo Bill is just so interesting. And I root for Clarice so hard. And it's honestly one of my favorite films of all time, not just horror. So yeah, I'm so sorry, Scream. I love you so much, but we're going to go Silence of the Lambs. Okay, so this is our Eerie 8. We've got Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Shining, The Fly, Alien, The Exorcist, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Silence of the Lambs. Now, this is a great top 8, but we're gonna have to whittle it down even more. I guess we could call it the Frightful 4 after this. That's the only F word I can think of right now that would be appropriate. So we're going to go back to the left-hand side, and there we've got Halloween versus the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Arguably two of the most important films of the 70s for horror, obviously especially for the slasher genre, both so integral in their own right, with two of the most memorable horror villains of all time, Leatherface and Michael Myers. So this is going to just come down to personal taste at this point. As much as Halloween is so amazing and so worth being one of the, I would say, most favorite horror movies of all time as far as fandoms go, I just have an affinity towards the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think if we're going with aesthetics, Tobe Hooper's direction and the cinematography with all of the shots in the daylight in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the disturbing imagery of the bones and the decorations of the Sawyer house. I talked about this in my top 10 favorite horror movie moments video, the scene where Pam is walking up to the Sawyer house. That shot is so iconic and so beautiful. And it's just one of those movies that holds nothing back. They did not care about anything besides getting their artistic vision across. And it's just so brave and so gutsy for the time. That is why it ekes out ahead over Halloween for me. So I'm really sorry, Halloween, but we're going with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on this one. Moving on down to The Shining versus The Fly. Two 80s movies against each other. It's so funny how this is working out, but I guess most of these are from the 70s and 80s. And then somehow the only two 90s movies got put together, which is really funny. We've got Kubrick versus Cronenberg. Love them both. They're both great. I've definitely seen The Shining more than I have seen The Fly. There's just something about The Shining, something about the way it's shot and the Overlook Hotel as a setting and just all the different characters we meet within the hotel and watching Jack spiral out of control. There's something about it that's just so magnetic, and though I think The Fly is good, I think it kind of lacks that je ne sais quoi that makes The Shining so special, just for me personally. So between these two, I'm gonna go with The Shining. So we say goodbye to The Fly, and The Shining is moving up into the top 4. Okay, so that is the left side, and we're moving on over to the right again. And we've got Alien versus The Exorcist. Two 70s movies again. Two very different movies, which I do like this contrast between the two. So we got to keep in mind, Desert Island. Between these two, which one would I want to watch the most? Which one am I grabbing if I'm seeing them on a DVD shelf or VHS tape shelf? Which one am I going for to rewatch and to have as my only horror movie? Oh, man, why is this so hard? Oh gosh. I love them both, and I think my gut is saying Alien. I think they both have so many strong suits, both great effects, both really interesting casts of characters. If we're going with setting, I think Alien has the more grand and impressive setting, whereas, obviously The Exorcist is just basically in one house. Very hard decision, very difficult, but I think Alien is going to beat out The Exorcist, so we'll say goodbye to The Exorcist. And we are moving Alien up into the top 4. All right, down here to A Nightmare on Elm Street versus Silence of the Lambs. This one is so hard for me. Oh, these are two of my favorites. They're both so good. If we're going with the strength of the story and the narrative and the way that the plot develops, I think Silence of the Lambs is stronger in that regard. Obviously, A Nightmare on Elm Street does have a few plot holes or, things that maybe you just have to suspend your disbelief more. But obviously, it's a movie that's more fantastical in that we have supernatural stuff happening. Silence of the Lambs, we don't have that. But again, both two strong female leads with Nancy and Clarice. Very strong villains as well. Freddy and then Hannibal and Buffalo Bill. So in that regard, they're pretty evenly matched. I will say I think A Nightmare on Elm Street is more fun than Silence of the Lambs, but Silence of the Lambs is just so strong overall. And they both have really good scores from what I remember about the Silence of the Lambs score, but the Nightmare on Elm Street one is just chef's kiss to that score. I really, really hate to say goodbye to Nightmare on Elm Street, but I think Silence of the Lambs is going to win this one. This could be one where, on a different day, I would choose A Nightmare on Elm Street because they're so close for me. But today, my gut is saying Silence of the Lambs, so we're going to have Clarice and Hannibal move on to the top 4. But please don't think I don't love A Nightmare on Elm Street because it is one of my favorite horror movies. Okay, so we've got our Frightful 4, Fearsome 4, whatever I said. So over on the left side, we've got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and The Shining. And this is one. It's really hard because I have so much love for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's one of my favorites. I know I keep saying that about literally every one of these movies, but The Shining just has so many layers to it. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a little bit more straightforward, and when I'm going back and comparing the two in my head and just thinking about the visuals and the performances, I think if we're doing performances head to head, The Shining is going to win. I think obviously those characters are written so much deeper than the ones in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and they work both within the context of each movie that works. No knock to Texas Chainsaw Massacre by any means, but I think with The Shining, it's more of focusing on these specific characters and what is happening to them and how they are relating to each other as a family. We get that a little bit with both the, Franklin and Sally and then the Sawyers in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's a bit more surface level. And again, I think if we're going with rewatchability, the one that I will find more things to latch onto and kind of get more out of on a substance level, I think that's going to be The Shining. I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like I said, it is one of my favorites, but for comparing the two, I think I gotta go with The Shining. I'm so sorry, Toby. I love you. Please don't get it wrong. So we are moving The Shining in to the top 2. What should we call the top 2? The terrorific 2? Terrifying 2? Okay, so moving back over to the right side, we've got Alien versus The Silence of the Lambs. Again, we've got some strong characters. We've got Ellen Ripley versus Clarice Starling, and the Xenomorph as the villain versus Hannibal and Bill. On those two fronts, I think simply from the fact that the Xenomorph is a creature, it doesn't communicate with the people on the ship, versus we've got two complex characters for the villains. I'm going with Silence of the Lambs on that one. Clarice and Ellen are both so strong, and I love them both almost equally. I think we do get a little bit more of Clarice's personality just because we get more of her background and all of that, so we kind of understand her as a character more than Ellen Ripley. That's not to say that Ripley is not a strong character, but we just know Clarice more intimately than we do Ripley. Both of these movies are expertly shot from a cinematography standpoint and editing and all of that. They're both excellent. So pretty equally matched there. Again, this is coming down to more personal taste, and I just think that I can watch Silence of the Lambs more. There are just more things about that movie that kind of stick with me more so than Alien. So I think this one, I'm going Silence of the Lambs. All right, so we've got our top 2 now. Very exciting. We have The Shining versus The Silence of the Lambs. Pretty epic top 2, although, like I said, another day, maybe I'm in a different mood. It would be 2 completely different movies up here in the top 2. But honestly, you can't really go wrong with any of the ones on this board. But these are 2 pretty epic top 2 movies. I think I've said pretty much everything I've wanted to say about both of these movies individually. So I think it's just coming down to what I feel in my heart. What movie, if I'm on a desert island, am I going to be completely happy that I picked? No regrets, no wishing it was something else. One that I just get a lot out of and enjoy and will ultimately never get tired of, no matter how many times I see it. And for that one, the winner of that title is going to be The Silence of the Lambs for me. I'm honestly a little surprised at how far The Shining got because I do not cite that as one of my favorite movies really ever. But when I do have it head to head, at least against the ones that it went up against on this, it was hard to deny just how good it is. But if we are going with the ultimate, the number one, the one that reigns supreme, it's got to be Silence of the Lambs for me. So that is it. That is my bracket. That is my horror movie March Madness Scary 16 bracket. And for those who would like to do their own, I've linked the image that you can download in the description. Please let me know if you do this bracket, which movie ends up being your number one. And you can definitely do it any way you would like. I did it from the perspective of a desert island movie, but if you would rather have different criteria for how you pick the number one, please by all means just do it however you want. I just want you to have fun with it. This is something that I have seen a couple other people do in the past. I've actually seen some people do, instead of movies on the bracket, they've done villains or characters as opposed to entire movies. So I do like that idea, and I'm considering doing another one of these videos before March Madness starts, or even later in the month. You know, if it's still March, who really cares if the basketball stuff is happening at the same time? But I might do one of those as well. So if you want to see that, please let me know in the comments, because I think that would be really fun. Like, which horror villain would win in a battle royale style rumble with all the other horror villains? So yeah, I would definitely be interested in doing that. So please let me know if you want to see that. So that's going to be it for today, everyone. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you aren't already a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd love to have you here. And I just want to share my love of horror with as many people as possible. So if you want to join in and join this little horror family, I would love to have you here. All of my socials and everything like that are linked below as well. So yeah, thanks again everyone for watching. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll talk horror next time.